And thank you everyone for being here today. I know we had a last minute change for a good reason. The Padres are playing tonight, and so we're wishing them well. And so we changed the time from this evening to during the day. So I appreciate y'all being here, even on the late notice. But I also want to thank our speakers who you're going to hear from shortly. We've got Deputy District Attorney Pat Espinoza is going to be here. Also from our San Diego Sheriff's Sergeant Miguel Lopez is here, and also Belinda Dreisey. She's a mother of a sexually violent predator victim. Her daughter was accosted. The goal of this town hall is actually to try to bring us all together so we can all have the knowledge of how this process really kind of works and operates. And I'm going to continue all I can do to stop these placements from happening at the county level. But in order to do that, we all have to, I need your help as well, but we all have to have an understanding of how it works and how to get involved. So in my district, we've been successful in defeating the majority of the SVPs, the sexually violent predators being placed. But it takes an entire community. Right now, we have a bit of a disconnect between, if a sexually violent predator is going to Borrego Springs, or they're going to Mount Helix or Rancho Bernardo or Jocumba, if they're being placed in a particular area, usually only it's that neighborhood that's out there attending the hearings and things like that and getting engaged. We need a countywide voice to stop this, hopefully someday. So that's kind of the purpose. And I know some of our speakers, they're doing their jobs and they do them well. They can't really take positions on these on the issues, but I can, and I don't want them here. So this is really just to kind of get everybody up to date, up to speed on how this process works. And it's not just one community's problem, but countywide. So 5 more potential sexually violent predators are going to be placed here in San Diego County. My understanding is right now, this company called Liberty Healthcare is actually trying to find locations for 5 more sexually violent predators. So I just want everyone to be equipped with the tools they need to hopefully stop these placements. And we're going to get to your questions. But first, I want to let some of our speakers talk on these issues, some of our professionals, and they deal with some of these sexually violent predators. We currently have, I think, 7 in the county, and they deal with them on a daily basis as well. So I want to invite our Deputy DA, Pat Espinoza, to go first and talk about the district attorney's role when it comes to sexually violent predators. So Deputy DA Pat Espinoza, if you want to take it away. Thanks.
Thank you, Supervisor Desmond. We appreciate you arranging this town hall, giving us the opportunity to educate more about the process. And I know this is an area that many members of the community have strong feelings about, particularly if you were to learn that your community is one that could potentially have an SVP placed. And so let me just introduce myself. My name is Pat Espinoza. I'm a chief deputy in the San Diego County District Attorney's Office. And what our role as the district attorney in the area of SVP litigation, we have kind of 2 roles. One is at the front end, and the second is on the back end. So let me explain a little bit on the front end. An SVP, there's sometimes a misunderstanding about what an SVP is. And you all have access to the Megan's Law website. And not every sex offender who's required to register is a sexually violent predator. A sexually violent predator is a small portion of all registered sex offenders who meet certain qualifications. And that is, did they commit a forcible sex crime? Do they suffer from a diagnosed mental disorder? And from that mental disorder, is it likely that they're going to commit another violent sex offense? That, in essence, of what an SVP is. So if someone, let's give the example, if someone committed a forcible sex crime like a rape, and they were convicted of that crime, went to state prison, and they finished their state prison sentence. Once they finish their state prison sentence, then they'll be screened at prison and determine, do they suffer from a diagnosed mental disorder that make them likely to continue to commit sex offenses? If the conclusion is they do, then they are referred to the Department of State hospitals where professionals at the state hospitals, the mental health professionals, will do a much more thorough analysis. And if they conclude, yes, this person meets the definition of being a sexually violent predator, they'll reach out to the district attorney and say, district attorney, do you want to file a petition to commit this individual as a sexually violent predator? When we receive those referrals from the Department of State Hospital, the DA will then file a petition in court. We file pleadings in court, and that starts the process to basically change someone from being a convicted prisoner in state prison to now say this person needs to go to the state mental hospital. And the way we do that is we then would have a court hearing, and just like a criminal trial, they would have the right that we'd have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. We present evidence like mental health professionals. We present evidence about the details of their prior crimes to educate the jury that this person meets the criteria to be a sexually violent predator. If we are successful and they're committed to the state hospital as a sexually violent predator, it's for what they call an indeterminate term. It's not a set number of years, but they could be there indefinitely. But what the law, the ways the law is currently written is that after 1 year in the state hospital as an SVP, a sexually violent predator, they have the right to petition for release. That's what we generally see as what are called 6608 petitions. So that the patient can bring a petition in court and say, I should be released. And the role of the district attorney at that stage then is to evaluate the evidence. And if we oppose the release, and most of the cases, I can't think of one that we have not opposed the release of an SVP. There could be some that could occur if they, if the evidence supports it. But as a general rule, we will oppose the release. And what we would do is we go into court, we present evidence, the SVP and his lawyer would present evidence, and then the judge would make the determination if the person is the type of SVP that's received enough treatment, improved enough in their situation that they are no longer a danger, and to place them in the community. And from that point on, let's say the judge ruled that they could be released, then the role of the district attorney at that stage would be to play a role in the public notification hearings that we would have in court, where the community is invited to come in, present their input. If a placement recommendation was made, and it's ultimately the judge's decision where to place the individual if they're deemed eligible for release. And so in a nutshell, those are the main phases of SVP litigation and the role of the district attorney in those in that aspect on the front, middle, and placement end of it. So it looks like I have about 5 minutes, and I may have used my 5 minutes up. So why don't I go ahead and introduce our next speaker, which is Sergeant Miguel Lopez from the San Diego County Sheriff's Department.
Thank you, Pat. So my name is Miguel Lopez. I'm the Sergeant of the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. I am the Sergeant for the SAFE Task Force. And SAFE stands for the Sexual Assault Felony Enforcement. And we're made up of me, 2 sheriff's detectives, 1 San Diego police detective, 1 parole agent, and 1 district attorney investigator. So when it comes to the SVPs, our number 1 role is public safety. And we have nothing to do when it comes to the actual locating the site, IDing a site, and the decision making that goes into that. So as Pat mentioned, once they are granted release, then a search for a site goes on, and they'll have their hearing for placement. So once that hearing is set, we get our letter indicating when the hearing is going to take place, and we put out a press release. And the press release pretty much gives all the info on the SVP, when the hearing takes place, and also we open it up for public comments. So we give, it's approximately 15 days. We like to do more sometimes if we have the time for people to go ahead and write us, email us, or call us, leave us a message, so that they can leave their comments as far as their opposition or their support for the placement of the individual out in their community. Once that window closes, we take all the public comments and we present them to the court hearing the case. So our district attorney investigator takes all those comments, screens all those comments, puts together the numbers, and they get presented to the court hearing the case, where the judge will go over these comments and essentially take everybody's input into consideration. Once the court makes the decision as far as, let's say, they're gonna go ahead and place them, then we will go and do a community notification. So we'll go out in the community and notify people in the immediate area that this person got granted their release, and we present them with sort of a bulletin where it has the person's picture, it has their information, and if they decide to take that bulletin, then they have to sign saying that they received the bulletin. And that's how we inform the community. Now, the SVPs are monitored by Liberty Health, and they do have to register every 90 days. And if they fail to do so, then we will take the appropriate law enforcement action. They're also under certain guidelines given to them as part of the treatment. If those said guidelines are violated, then we're contacted and that person goes back into custody. The guidelines, they're set forth by the hospital, and has to do with their treatment. So we do have SVPs out there that have gone through the treatment and are able to go out and get jobs and drive around and sort of live sort of a normal life as far as them being able to have a job and you know, be independent. But the thing is that they still have to register and we still monitor them. So like I said, our number one priority, our number one role in all this is the public safety, and we work very closely with the DA's office on this. That's really all I have.
Miguel, a question came in for you. It's, can you repeat how we submit public comments expressing opposition?
Yes, so there's when we put out our press release, we do have the link to the email and to our website where people can go ahead and email us their opposition, or also we put out our address, our physical address, and they can send US mail, and there's a phone number they can call to leave the comments there.
Well, we're going to get on to our next speaker. We'll take, I see some hands already popping up, which is good. But I'll go to Kyle Sand here next. Kyle is he's a senior deputy county counsel, and let him speak, and then Kyle, and then we'll go to Belinda and then get to questions. And I know there's a lot of them out there probably. So Kyle, you want to take it?
Thanks, Supervisor Desmond. The county's role has been somewhat constrained traditionally in terms of how it handles the release of sexually violent predators. The county being the county as an organization outside of the DA or the Sheriff's Department. However, the Board of Supervisors is on record as opposing all sexually violent predator placements in San Diego. At the request of Supervisor Desmond last year, we have been submitting opposition to the Department of State Hospital. We have written a letter notifying them that the county is in opposition to all sexually violent predator placements. And we also, until there's significant changes in state law, as well as with every court potential placement, the county is on record submitting that to the court, letting them know that the county is in opposition. That is one of the measures that the county does do in this process. Now, in San Diego County, under state law, when a sexually violent predator is approved for conditional release, the county, as the county of domicile, is to designate an agency or program to provide assistance and consultation with the Department of State Hospital, and that's a requirement in state law currently. Now in San Diego, that's been Behavioral Health Services. In other counties, it is different entities within their counties. Now in October of last year, at the request of Supervisor Desmond Anderson, the board directed the county's designated agency, BHS, Behavioral Health Services, to work with other county departments to vet as much as possible these placements before they're heard by the judge. Due to some of the confidentiality constraints that have been imposed by the court, there's not a quick turnaround, but there has been coordination with coordination with planning and development services to take a look at some of these sites, see if there's any potential code issues and so forth, and make sure that that is before the court in a timely way. Now, one of the significant changes that's occurred recently with the passage of the recent state law that does away with the designated agency concept and creates what's been called a housing search committee made up of various different officials and their designees. Now, we're still reviewing that law and how it's going to be implemented with this housing search committee. County council, and one of the reasons why I'm speaking is we are designated as a member of this housing search committee. So we are right now actively reviewing that legislation that'll be going into effect next year, and working through how that would actually work in practice. And that has been our involvement in the role up to now. To see from my time, I'll turn it over to Supervisor Desmond.
Before we go to Belinda here, I just got a couple of quick questions myself here, just for the, I guess first to Mr. Espinoza. The DA, when I've gone to the court hearings, I've been to 3 so far, the actual hearings, there's usually a DA there, and it appears they're taking the position of opposing the placement. And is that true? Is that a blanket opposal, or what's how does that work in the courtroom when you're there and this hearing is taking place? Is the DA there in opposition?
Well, at that stage, that's usually the placement hearing that you're referring to. Is that right? Yeah. So our point in the litigation prior to that is we're opposing the position of release. And so, we oppose the release. And, at the placement hearing, there have been instances where we've opposed the placement. And so I don't know which one you're speaking to specifically, but it may be one where we actually took a position. As a general, at that stage, we're supposed to be more of a facilitator to allow just the input from the community to be presented to the court. But recently we have actually taken a position, which is unusual. It's very unusual at that stage for the district attorney to take a position on placement, but that has happened in a few cases recently.
Yeah, well, and I want to say thank you for that, but I didn't know if that was a blanket or I guess it all changes. And then to our deputy, let's see, Mr. Lopez, I think the Sergeant Lopez. Who does if a person gets placed, like this guy just got placed out of Borrego Springs, who does the monitoring? Is it Liberty Healthcare, or is it the Sheriff's Department, or who's actually in charge of the monitoring for this person that gets placed?
So Liberty Healthcare has them on a GPS device, and they put a geofence on it. So if they violate that geofence, then they get a notification.
And then, like in the case of Borrego, though, if they get a notification, Liberty doesn't have anybody on site. Do they call the local sheriff station and ask for assistance? Is that, but so Liberty's not actually doing the enforcement, are they?
Correct. No, they're not. They would call the Sheriff's Department to go and respond and check on it.
Or whoever whatever police agent, law enforcement agency is at the site of placement. Okay.
Right.
Okay. And then Belinda Dreisey, if you want to tell your story, and then we'll go back to kind of the process. But your daughter was a victim of Michael Martinez, who just got placed. And if you want to share a little bit of your story, and then we'll go to public questions. Thank you.
Well, my story goes back 30 years when Michael Martinez was convicted. This was his second offense. And at the time I said I did not think that he would ever stop and that he would continue once he got through his prison time, his parole, his probation, and if he's on any medication, that once all that quit, that he would do this again. Now we know that Michael Martinez has been convicted multiple times. Over the years, we had not heard anything. Back in 2018, they were going to release him and they had a hearing. And we were contacted and we showed up at the hearing and begged them not to have him released into the community, that he is dangerous. And that if we're not home with our children 100% of the time, you can't protect them. The other thing that I see, and I've talked a lot with Jim Desmond, is that there is not very much notification to a parent that has gone through this. Part of it is we as a family have kept an eye on it. You know, you look at you have to know who the predator is and go on to Megan's Law and look for where they're being placed. And they shouldn't be in our communities. They shouldn't be anywhere near our kids. And I know that over the last couple of weeks in talking with Jim Desmond is when he talked to Liberty Health, they don't disclose a lot of information. We don't know how long they're going to be in that in that setting. Are we going to be notified if he moves, if he's back out in the community? We need to be aware of that. So even 30 years later, this still is something that I'm very passionate about, because I don't want what we went through to have another family go through it, or multiple families go through it. So somebody needs to be the voice. And it's us as a family, as a community, as a city, as a county, as a state, actually as a nation, that we have to try and stop having these violent predators placed in our community where our children are growing up.
Okay, thanks, Belinda. And we can maybe weigh in here. I'm going to try to go through kind of rapidly some of these questions that we've got in the chat. I know that people have hands up too. We'll get to those as well. First one, is, can the county put in our charter so that SVPs who lived in San Diego County prior to the conviction can be placed in San Diego County after being released from prison? Basically, I think that's the way it already happens right now, and I'm going to let other experts answer on this, but my understanding is that these sexually violent predators used to live in San Diego County. And so they're coming back to San Diego County. I think they go back to their county of origin. I don't know, Patrick, or do you have anything on that? Or
Sure. Yeah. The way the SVP law is written is what we call the county of domicile. In other words, where they're from when they were convicted of their crime. Once they finish their prison sentence and once they're released from state hospital, they should go back to that county where they did their crime. That's the general rule that is in the law. However, there's an exception that says if extraordinary circumstances exist, according to the judge, they can be placed in a county other than their county of domicile. And as I don't know if Supervisor Desmond recalls this, but at one point they tried to place a SVP from another county after they basically searched for a placement and said, there's no acceptable place within our county. Let's put them in San Diego County. And it was in Supervisor Desmond's district. And that we were very successful working closely with Supervisor Desmond and his staff and presenting why that should not be an alternative. And ultimately, I think the judge did reach the conclusion, no, San Diego County wasn't the right county. Didn't look for another location within San Diego County, but sent it back to that county of domicile and said, look elsewhere.
So generally, they're coming back to their county of origin. Primarily. Another question is, Judge Wells being paid to side with Liberty Healthcare? No, I don't think so. What are the diagnoses? What are the diagnoses that are made to prevent SVPs from being released? So from the state hospital, is there any? I don't know if anybody knows this because we don't have anybody here from the state hospital. But maybe Patrick, how do you keep them in a hospital? What are there any triggers or things like that that would preclude them from being released and would keep them at the state hospital? I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's no mental diagnosis that would keep them from being released. The question on whether they should be released or not is, are they likely to reoffend? And that is the crucial question that the judge answers in determining whether the individual should be released, because oftentimes they suffer from a mental diagnosis or a mental health disorder that there's no cure for. So that will always be the same. What can change is their level of dangerousness. And that is the type of question that the judge is going to make that determination in determining whether the person should be granted release or not.
Okay.
For Sergeant Lopez, I know you mentioned the press release that was sent out, that you guys send out. Is there a way for the public to see that, and some of that I know supervisors is our office will send that out, but is there a way that for people to log on and keep a monitor of that?
So we put these out on our public website, and also they go out on our Twitter and Mixel. So if somebody wants to follow the San Diego County Sheriff's Department, these will pop up on the Twitter.
Wonderful. Okay. And then how are the judges? I don't know who this could be. Maybe Patrick, Sergeant, maybe even Kyle. I don't know. How are the judges chosen between each case? I know Judge Gill's been at the front of it, but I know we had a supervisor had another judge a few weeks ago.
Weathers. I think his name was Weathers. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a presiding judge, and it's like, like the supervisor of judges. And so as these cases come in, the presiding judge will assign them to the available judges. Particularly, they like to assign the judges that have experience in the area. And Judge Gill, he does handle a lot of our SVP cases, but he is also the most experienced, the most senior judge, and he has the most tenure. And so that may play a role as to why he's assigned a large amount of the SVP cases.
Again, if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A. We've got about 30 minutes. We want to try and get through as many of your questions as possible. You'll see it down on the bottom. Supervisor, I know this is something you've been on. Who pays their rent and living expenses, and how much is that?
I don't know. Well, the rent I know is usually 2 or 3 times the market rate, because that's how Liberty Healthcare, one of the things, the way they entice people to rent their houses to these people. And taxpayers, this is all on the taxpayer dime. So that's who pays for it. And I'd rather have our taxpayer dollars being spent on keeping them in state hospitals as opposed to in our neighborhoods. But you do pay those bills.
Sergeant, this may be for you here. Who does, I know you mentioned who does the monitoring, but are SVPs allowed to go to the grocery store, visit a park? Is there some sort of curfew for them?
Well, that all depends on what Liberty Healthcare and mostly the Department of State Hospitals sets as their rules. So as their treatment progresses, they're allowed to do more and more. But the particulars, we don't know. We don't know what exactly the rules that they set on them are.
Well, and this is kind of a crux for me that I brought up. I even asked Judge Gill at one of his hearings, how do we let the neighbors know if this sexually violent predator has been placed? And I asked the question, can he leave or anything? And the answer I got was no, he can only leave if he's escorted. And then I said, well, if good behavior or whatever the case may be, if now he's able to be let out, can we let the neighbors know? So if they see this guy out walking now to the park or going to the grocery store or something like that, there's no way. And it was kind of blunt, and they said, no, that would be a violation of this person's rights, which I think with what they've done, they should have given those up. But so there's no real way to tell that we can let. I mean, they must let you know, don't they? That now this person can be out. Is that protected information? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Sergeant. I know you're doing your job, but can we tell the neighbors when that shift happens?
Well, because it is part of the treatment, it is protected under HIPAA, is my understanding. So all that stuff we don't have access to, unfortunately. And I would assume that if they were starting to grant them more privileges, then it would let out in the first place what part of their treatment was. So unfortunately, we're not entitled to that information.
I guess the only way people would know is if they see somebody out and then they call you or the deputy, they call the sheriffs or they call the local law enforcement, and law enforcement tells them, well, this guy can do it now. But it's just kind of unfortunate. People have to live in fear and not know. But anyway, okay. Miles, we got more questions?
Yeah, question for Pat here. How many SVPs are in the county right now?
Well, that question I assume is how many SVPs on conditional release? And there are currently, let's see, I think 6 on conditional release. As of November 18th, there could be 7. And I answer the question that way because there could be someone who was formerly an SVP, is now a registered sex offender, is living in the county, but is not on the conditional release program and not under supervision of the Department of State hospitals. And so they're still an SVP, but they're not in the conditional release program that we're talking about here. So the number is 6, soon to be 7. And the interesting thing is statewide, as of January of this year of 2022, there were 16 in the whole state. And at that time we had 5. And so we have a large number of the percentage of the total SVPs in the conditional release program in the state of California.
This may piggyback right off. This is a question from Amy. Are there any guidelines or laws? And I don't know if Kyle, if you have any of this from county council, but are there any guidelines or laws on how many can be placed within a certain area? I assume that's more like Borrego versus Jacumba versus somewhere else, but not sure if anybody has an answer to that.
I can answer that. There was an attempt to pass legislation this year to limit the number of SVPs within a supervisory district, but that legislation did not become law. So that may be where the question's coming from. But other than that, there's no limitation on, within a county or a subdivision of a county, how many SVPs can be placed there, so long as they meet the requirements of the site assessments, which is, it can't be certain distance between schools or parks or things like that. But there's no limit. For example, you can't have X amount within the city of San Marcos or something like that. No such further limitation exists.
Sergeant Lopez, I hate to put you on the spot here. Do you speak Spanish? Because we have a couple questions in Spanish.
I do, and actually I can send them my phone number and I can talk to those people on the phone if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We'll get you in contact with that. Here's a question here, a little complicated. If a sexually violent predator is in their home, according to their ankle bracelet, and let's say there's a victim in the house, how would you know, or how would you respond?
That's a good question. As soon as they leave their geofence, we get notified but if somebody goes into their house, we have no way of knowing that.
Yeah. And Supervisor, I think some of this town hall, the reason you wanted to have it was to find out some of these things. So you could, we can go back, you can go back to the board or to the state and figure some of these questions out. I've got a couple email questions here I wanted to go to. Whoever, this is for whomever. What happened to the prison trailer program that used to be in place here in the state? And if so, why did it stop?
There was a point in time early on, after the SBP law was enacted and they were releasing and placing in the community, that they did place them on trailers near the state prison. But that is no longer an option. And the reasoning was that that's not really integrating these offenders into the community, which is the goal of treating them and then having them placed, is to integrate them in the community. And even though that was probably the best spot in terms of public safety, the court said that's not really integrating them in the community. And so they moved away from that, and that is no longer an option. In fact, it often comes up at placement times, and we have a standing letter that we have to go and inquire with the Department of Corrections, and they'll say that it's no longer an option to place them on outside the prison grounds in a trailer.
Supervisor, I know that's something near and dear to your heart, because that's something you've been wanting to see happen. And I guess I'll kind of piggyback off this question here. How do we change the laws to prevent SVPs from being released into the community?
We we need to change the lawmakers in Sacramento. I mean, it's basically what it comes down to. So, I mean, these are state laws that can be changed by state legislators, and right now the political will isn't there, unfortunately, at this point in time.
Another one to you, Supervisor, from Dawn here is she said, is the only real way to help stop SVPs from being replaced having very strong public opposition after a press release. I know you've been successful in 4 out of the 5, so if you don't mind just talking a bit about that.
Well, absolutely. And unfortunately, the Liberty Healthcare and others are going to the path of least resistance of Borrego, Jacumba, where there's fewer people that live there, although there's still families, there's still children and things like that. So like when they, Rancho Bernardo was a quick blip on the screen when they wanted to police a sexually violent predator in Rancho Bernardo on the golf course. That one got squashed quickly. This on Mount Helix, so there was similar type of circumstance. But I do want to. I don't know if this really came up. The timeline is Sergeant Lopez. You get notified 30 days prior to a hearing. That's kind of when the clock starts, or when we or the public knows here's a site and it's been located and there's going to be a hearing. That's really all we have, is that 30-day period. Is that correct?
Yes, sometimes we do get a little bit more, but it just depends on when the paperwork works its way through the state hospital and we get our notification.
Okay. And I guess, I don't know if the others want to comment on this, I guess the successful or the non-placements that we've been able to concentrate on is we've, canvassed the neighborhoods, find out where the kids live, find out if there's homeschools or if there's regular schools. It's still, I think, out for debate. I don't know if there's law been established or not yet that I think the sexually violent predators have to be so far of a distance away from a school. Now, does a homeschool count as a school? That's, I think, still to be decided, because that's one of the instances that we have for a potentially second placement in Borrego Springs. So we're hoping that, homeschool count as it's those same requirements as far as distances away. But, in that 30-day time period, it's that neighborhood usually comes together and has helps us with the canvassing of the neighborhood and the makeup of the neighborhood, and we take pictures of the swing sets nearby and bus stops or school, if there's school bus stops and things like that. So we try to paint the neighborhood as this is not the right place. I did see Judge Gill. He did shut down one placement. It was in Ranchita, and the house was just in terrible shape. I guess animals had been living there, coyotes or whatever, wild animals have been living there and had been defecating in there, and it was just not suitable for anybody to live in. But it certainly pays off, and then to have the people at the hearings. The Liberty Healthcare is there at the hearing, and then the courtrooms can usually hold 20, 30 people. The judges, both that I've gone before, they've been amenable, very understanding. But sometimes they say, well, the rules are the rules, and here's our state law, and that's kind of what we're dealing with. But voices make a difference, and that's kind of what we're trying to learn today here is how can we, I don't know if anybody else, if Patrick or Kyle or Sergeant, what have you seen or been kind of the I don't know if there are roadblocks or ways that have persuaded judges not to put in placements. If you come up, school issues, I know is one. Is there any other ones that tend to sway a judge's decision not to do a placement?
What I've seen is when the community is actively interested and they know their community best, and they can point out things that perhaps the original site assessment didn't fully take into account, and they could point out maybe that there are disabled children in the area, that there actually is homeschools, as you mentioned, Supervisor Desmond. And so those, what would escape the initial site assessment, the community knows their community well, and they're engaged. They will point out reasons like bus stops or school bus stops or people or locations where school children gather to to get picked up by the bus that wouldn't otherwise be known to the site assessment. So I've seen those type of issues raised by the community that have really created some pause on behalf of the judges who are going to make those placement decisions. Or, if it's like, as you mentioned, just inhabitable, there's some problems with the placement itself in terms of structures and things like that. So that's my observation.
Yeah, and on just about every one of these, we've sent county code enforcement to these sites to see if they're out of violations, or they put something on without a permit, or the fire hazard. So we do those efforts, but one of the things, though, unfortunately, it's usually just the community that's affected that is voicing the opinion. And I know if there's people on here that, we got to work together to fight this throughout all of San Diego County, not just the poor community that's being affected or being picked on at that point in time. So it'd be nice if we can get people outside of those communities as well. We definitely need the people in those communities because they know it. But if we can get enough voices and to beat that same drum that these guys should not be here, and hopefully stop them from being placed. It's voices make a difference, and I think if we can do it as a county as opposed to just a neighborhood, I think that's going to be to our benefit.
I know that's something Belinda's been doing on the media as well, sharing her story and trying to get that out there. Pat, you talked about a seventh SVP. We've gotten some variation of this question of who, when, where, what. Do you mind giving some specifics if you have them?
I can't give a name, but I can. A judge issued an order that by November the 18th, there should be another placement in the community. But that may that doesn't necessarily mean that on the 18th there will be a total of 7, because oftentimes there's a possibility that one of those current 6 could be taking off conditional leash by that time, but you just can't tell. So by the 18th, once that placement is made, then we'll have a better understanding of the total number at that time.
Sergeant, I know. Oh, yeah, Supervisor.
Well, we haven't had a 30-day notice yet on that, and today's the 18th, so it would make sense it would come out today, possibly. I don't know, unfortunately.
November the 18th.
Yeah, I know, but so isn't there a 30-day prior? Today's October 18th, so we might hear, unfortunately, today about the potential site for what?
No, I'm sorry. Maybe I wasn't clear. There already was a placement hearing for this one. And so that person was already ordered to be placed. Just the actual placement hasn't occurred yet.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I know one was recently placed, I guess, in Hagamba again, which seems to be a dumping ground, and unfortunately. Good, Miles, I see some people have their raised hands. Are you able to accommodate that, or
yeah, I see one here. I don't see a name. It's KMCEW. I don't know if you want to. We'll take your call. Hopefully, if it's a good one here. If you have a question.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, I do have a question. So even though we have all these laws that obviously need to be changed, we have a DA's office that when they are aware of a crime and they know that there's something that is not right, if it goes to a judge and a judge it's not the judge's decision. It all starts with the DA's office. Would you all agree with that? That if they decide not to prosecute one of these people or follow them or look into what their behavior is, then where do we start from that point? Because we only have one person right now running for the DA's office, and that's Summer Stevens. That's
Pat, if you want to get to that question here, sorry.
I'm not really sure what the question was. I guess, I mean, she was inquiring about, I don't know, generally about the DA's role, but on the specific question of release petitions, if the SVP files a petition for release, the district attorney is the party that then would go into court and oppose release. And that's what we do. I mean, there hasn't been a case that I'm aware of ever, and I've been doing this for 27 years, where we have not opposed the release of an SVP. Now, that's a separate question. Once a judge rules, let's say that they are entitled to release, then the question of placement is one a separate question. And generally, we don't have input on where to put someone. We don't get involved in those decision makings. That's not the DA's role. We do then facilitate so for the input to come in and present that input to the judge. And as I pointed out earlier, there have been a few occasions recently, it's unusual that we've actually taken a position not to place someone at a specific location for whatever, the specifics of that case were.
And I think the caller was actually asking more in general about prosecuting crime as opposed to, today we're talking about the placement of sexually violent predators, and it's a different subject, but I know our district attorney is tough on crime, but caseloads are another thing as well. So that's a whole separate issue. But we're trying to focus here on these sexually violent predators, of how we as a community can hopefully stop these and get a better understanding of the process. So do you have any other questions there, Miles? Or
Yeah, absolutely. We've got here in a kind of some form of this has been mentioned. So Supervisor, if you want to take this one, Liberty Healthcare and the housing placement process, as far as where can the homes be? Does it matter if they're within a big community? If you don't mind explaining it, and I know you mentioned it earlier, but also about the rental process.
I be honest with you, I don't know in the particulars. Maybe we should have had somebody from Liberty Healthcare on here today, but I can't tell you what the parameters are of the houses, other than there's probably something about proximity to schools and things like that. But I don't know. But Liberty Healthcare, I know, and I've heard them in the hearings. They say they struggle with trying to find suitable locations because a lot of landlords will say no. And normally just kind of the trend I've seen is normally it's an out-of-state landlord on some of these houses and some of the placements. I don't know if that's the norm, but it appears that the landlord's no longer there. And then I have seen that the rent has been, multiple times what the market rate is to entice the landlord to allow a home to be rented. So I don't have all the particulars, but I do know they pay a lot more than market rate rent to try to find these homes for the placements. But I don't know if it's obviously it can be very urban as well, because the golf course in Rancho Bernardo and Mount Helix, those are very urban areas. So they must have been. I've fallen under the parameters, but I don't have all of those here. Maybe that's something we can find out and do some more research. So thank you.
Absolutely. Another question here from Jennifer, kind of similar. Can we push for placements in industrial areas to at least keep them out of family neighborhoods?
I don't know that. There's usually isn't just a one-off house in an industrial area. Maybe in an industrial building or something like that, but there's still people conducting business. I mean, that's something we can look at and see if that's a possibility. I'm not aware, but that's something we can dig into.
Pat, I know you've talked about this. We got a question. Do they take into an account how many children live in a community whenever they do something like this?
I can't speak for what factors go into Liberty's decision making in terms of when they select a placement. There's a general site assessment that they do that has the criteria like bus stops and schools, things that I mentioned. But I don't know if they look generally as the number of kids within the community that are outside certain distances with schools. That I don't know. I don't know if Miguel knows the answer.
Oh, it's not. Yeah, and unfortunately, just my dealings with Liberty Healthcare, they're kind of tight-lipped in the fact that they look at these sexually violent predators. They call them patients. They don't call them sexually violent predators. They are trying to get this person back on a path. And they haven't been very forthcoming in some of their some of the information, which is what I did a public records request, which we have not received the information yet, but I did a public records request between Liberty Healthcare and and the judge and the process and things like that, and information that went back and forth. We'll see how much of it gets redacted or not, but we are trying to get that information out so that we know what areas they're looking for. And they're not going to bring one forward that doesn't fit the criteria, I guess. But they have had some difficulties. I was kind of surprised to hear, though. I think Patrick, you'd mentioned that we've got out of 16, we have 7 of them in San Diego County. Are they all? What are we doing here that we're growing these people and they're coming back to our region? That
Well,
just
you know,
seems
That's
askew.
a good question. And it's because the SVP law has been around since 96. And we in San Diego County, we've been very timely when someone finishes prison, hospital says, DA, do you want to file a petition? And we file the petition in a timely manner, and then we litigate the case and we send them to the state hospital. What we've seen in other counties is what there's been 13-year delays in having the SVP trial, 16-year delays, and those kind of delays have caught the attention of the appellate courts. The appellate courts have come down in 3 recent cases who called out that lengthy delay and called it a speedy trial violation, and then dismissed the petition. And so those sex offenders were never actually officially committed. They didn't even start the commitment process because there's been delays of 13, and 16 years in 3 notable cases that are now published opinions from our appellate courts. And so we just haven't had those kind of delays. Our goal has been, once we get the petition, let's make sure we get the commitment. Once we get the commitment, we'll send them to the hospital to get the SVP treatment. And so that, what we think, plays a big role in why now those SVPs that we sent in 96 or the year 2000 or later, they've been in the hospital for 6 or 7 years, and now they're bringing their release petitions. And I think that goes a long way in explaining why San Diego County has 5 or 6 of, at least in January of the beginning of the year, when there was a statewide total of 16.
Hey, government's good at dragging our heels. Why don't we do some more of that? But anyway.
Lori had a question here and talking about, is there any way to prevent out-of-state landlords from establishing a lucrative SVP, property model here? I know the one in Rancho Bernardo, or maybe not the Rancho Bernardo, but a lot of these folks have been out-of-state placements, and they're buying homes in Jacumba, Ranchita, Borrego, things like that. Do you have anything to that, Supervisor?
Not really, but I have seen that there's been some local pressure put on landlords, even though they weren't living nearby. But I know the neighbors in one instance contacted the landlord and were very vocal, and were able to persuade the landlord not to go through it and to pull out. So I've seen that happen. I also saw one instance, I think it was in Borrego Springs, where there again a placement potential on golfers. A bunch of I'm not sure what the number is, but several neighbors bought the house from the landlord and then didn't allow it to be used. So there's been some unique maneuvering, I guess, buying the house, or letting the current landlord know the displeasure of the neighbors, and that has worked in a couple of instances.
As we're almost out of time here, I just kind of wanted to wrap it back up with everyone. And Belinda, I just wanted to start with you, if you don't mind. And we have people kind of joining us here late. If you don't mind, just kind of reiterating, who you are, your story, and then just kind of what people can do to get involved, and then we'll just kind of go through the final speakers here.
Yes, I've dealt with this for 30 years. So 30 years ago, my daughter was molested by Michael Martinez. And at the time, it was his second offense. I know he's had 4 convictions. And I think what I would like to see is more knowledge of what's going on, when they're going to be released. I don't know how they tracked us down in 2018, and we went to his hearing. And at the time I said, I would like to be more involved in this. And I had reached out to Jim Desmond's office, and that's how I got back involved, because I was watching the website. I had seen that there was a hearing after that fact in July. I knew there was one coming up in September, planned on being at that one, and then they placed him the Friday before the hearing. So you have to be vigilant. You have to know what you're looking for. And we as families that potentially have these predators coming into our neighborhoods or any of the neighborhoods, we need to be that voice, and we need to be at those hearings every single time there's a hearing. I know that Jim Desmond and I have talked about it, and he said usually when you go the first hearing, there are quite a few people, but as they keep postponing them or changing the hearing dates, less and less people show up. So we need a public perspective of it, and maybe it's a joint thing that we work with the DA's office, our superintendents, our supervisors, and make sure that the word gets out there on a regular basis, every day, every time someone's coming up for a hearing, so that, as Jim Desmond said, is we have to be that voice, because it doesn't go away. I mean, we're talking 30 years old, 30 years for my family.
Well, I'm going to kind of wrap it up unless, Miles, did you have any other work or any other comments?
I think, no, you can take it away. So.
Well, and there's still work to be done. We didn't, the main intent of this Zoom today was to get people aware, let them know what the process is, so that we can potentially fight, any more of these placements in San Diego County. The Board of Supervisors, as was mentioned, has unanimously voted to take that position, not to allow any more in, but the state says otherwise, and unfortunately, that's where we are. So I really want to thank, all of our speakers. We had our Chief Deputy Pat Espinoza. Thank you very much for your input and your insight. It was good. Sergeant Miguel Lopez, thanks for your input as well. Also, Kyle Sands, our Senior Deputy County Counsel. Thanks for reiterating, what the positions that the county has had. And Belinda Dicey. Belinda, it's so sad that your daughter was accosted by Mr. Martinez, and you carry that throughout your life. And unfortunately, these sexually violent predators get on with theirs. So there's more work to be done. It's, like I said, hopefully we'll get more community-wide input. Contact my office anytime. Just Google Jim Desmond and call my office. We're happy to take calls. And if you've got ideas for other ways of preventing these people from being placed in our neighborhoods, be happy to help and be here. So thanks all for being here today. Thanks for all the speakers. Great event, and we're going to keep fighting.